Hey, it's Mrs. D, and I make videos about something students hate, doing research. I used to be one of those students and routinely phoned it in, until I had to teach it. So I set out on a quest, find a way to make doing academic research and writing research papers as painless as possible. I focus solely on MLA format and citations, so if you're looking for Chicago or APA style, I'm not going to be helpful. Maybe one day, but today's not looking so hot and tomorrow's not promising either. So, if you're ready, let's go on an MLA journey in research. Today's part of the journey: Hi, I'm Mrs. D, and this is Types of Sources, where to find them, and how to tell if they are worth the effort. Forewarning, this is a big video, so sit tight and buckle up, because here we go. I'm not going to pretend you're not going to use Google to find sources. I'm not going to pretend you're not going to consult with Wikipedia. I'm not even going to pretend you're not going to rely on an online database. It's the 21st century, and gone are the days when I was first introduced to library research. Disclaimer, I am a child of the 80s, so I've done both the old-style research and the hip new modern type. As I've told classes past, I remember going into the library, taking a small scrap of paper and a bowling pencil, and approaching the card catalog. For those of you who don't know, it's a large piece of furniture with narrow long drawers full of small cards with bare bones info about a book, title, author, publication info, and a code. I'd write down the code of the book I wanted, and then I'd stare at the stacks of books, all arranged by type, fiction, nonfiction, etc., subject and author, and try to figure out where the heck the book I wanted was. I'd crack jokes about dusty shelves and bats flying out of the card catalog, but that's how research was done. I became friends with technology-assisted research in the 90s, when I'd use a computer to help find print sources. But the sources I had were still from brick-and-mortar places, and I could hold them in my hand. I understand that libraries are making the leap to have their collections digitized. I'm all for it. With space being limited versus the quantity of physical items, digitizing libraries is a great tool in preservation and providing access to materials. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make is relying solely on the results of a Google search or database dump, while providing you with a wealth of knowledge, shouldn't be a crutch or replacement for actual physical sources. Not to mention, many times primary sources are not found online. Now that I've had that mini rant, on to clarify more about types of sources. Really, there are two types, and they're not in hand or online. Secondary sources. Yes, I'm starting here because almost every student seems to rely on secondary sources. These are articles, books, interviews, etc. about other things. For instance, when dealing with the topic of pollution and coastal ecosystems, a website with facts about coastal ecosystems is a secondary source. An article about a scientific study is a secondary source. Primary sources. The scientific study results in the secondary source is the primary source. An interview with an expert is a primary source. A diary entry is a primary source. An autobiography is a primary source. So many students almost seem afraid of primary sources. Why? Don't be. That's like having someone buy you an ice cream cone. Yes, the ice cream is still good, but don't be lazy. Get it yourself. So, what's out there? Books and textbooks, newspapers, academic and trade journals, government reports and legal documents, press releases and advertising, flyers, pamphlets, and leaflets, multimedia, websites, blogs and personal websites, social media pages, and message boards. As I've already mentioned, finding sources can be as simple as going to good old Google, typing in a few choice keywords, and bam, thousands of results in less than a minute. That's right, thousands. I've always felt that in order to do a proper 8 to 10 page research paper, at least 5 sources are needed. At least one source per main point you're trying to prove, plus at least one source per counter-argument. Representing both sides is crucial. I can't stress this part enough. Keeping a balance and representing the pro-con arguments of your topic will show that not only are you making strong arguments for your cause, but also acknowledging that there is a counter-argument that has equally valid points. To the opposing side, of course. This shows you're taking care to recognize your opponents and addressing that they will find fault in your arguments as you're finding fault in theirs. I also highly encourage students to go beyond the standard fare of websites and database articles. This means interviews, audio-video clips, actual books and newspapers, etc. There are so many source types, why limit yourself? To wit, I totally get that some sources are intimidating, especially to cite. Don't let that deter you from using them. One great resource that so many people overlook is the works cited or bibliography at the end of scholarly sources. Even footnotes and endnotes can be helpful. These list the sources your source used. Look at it this way. Someone else already did the work in finding these sources, so why not take advantage of it? Another resource that is underutilized? Your librarian. Your librarian should be your go-to person to help find sources, and citing them, and making interlibrary loan requests. Honestly, if by the end of a research project you aren't on a first-name basis with your librarian, were you even researching? Along the same lines, utilize your school's learning center or academic center. They may go by different names, but their purpose is the same, a place for students to come to get her done. While you certainly can work independently, learning centers offer free assistance with a range of assignments, and there's usually a staff member or two that specializes in academic research and writing. I know, I was one of those people. You've done the research. How can you tell if the sources you found are legit, useful, worthwhile? In other words, did you just waste a weekend searching for sources when you could have Netflixed and chilled? First, let's look at some of the basic information you can glean from a source by asking the following questions. Who is the author? Is the person well known? What credentials does the author have? If the author has a reputation, preferably positive, that you can recognize right away, chances are your sources are legit. If you're not sure who it is, look at their credentials. Being experts in the field, having degrees, or other designations or accolades means there's a good chance they know their stuff. Run a name through Google too and see what pops up. What is the source? What is its reputation? Just because the National Enquirer is a well-known publication doesn't mean it's a reputable source. The New York Times also carries a large readership, but also carries a trust amongst its readers. Mostly. Also, in regards to web sources, websites that end with edu or .org are more legit than .com. That's not to say there aren't great resources out there on websites that have .com in the URL, but make sure to check the About or similarly labeled section to get the lowdown on who's sharing the information if you're not sure. Common domain extensions include .com, commercial site, .gov, government-owned and operated site, .org, run by an organization, .edu, educational institution, .net, network provider. Domains with a star indicate they can be purchased by anyone, not to deter you from using them, but tuck that in your back pocket. What outside sources does this source cite? This is particularly true of scholarly works that typically come with their own works cited pages. Not only does that list give insight as to the legitimacy of the source, but could potentially point you in the direction of new sources to look into. Didn't I say this already? When was it published? This is relevant when it comes to hard data. If you're trying to show rates of pollution decreasing, looking at data in the last 5 years is much more reliable than in the period of 1990 to 2001, unless there is something significant about that time period. As a general rule, if your data is more than 2 to 3 years old, it's already outdated. This is especially true in the sciences. Borrowing from Ferris Bueller, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Who is the intended audience? Academic writing, like journals and other scholarly sources, are aimed at a targeted audience. Other sources, newspapers and such, are made for a more general audience. Look at the vocabulary used and try to ascertain the tone of the piece. Fact, opinion, propaganda. In the era of fake news, knowing what you're reading is super important, but how to tell the difference? Fact, something known to be true. Cell phones are a means of communication. Opinion, thoughts by a group or individual. My cell phone is the best. Propaganda, typically biased spreading of info using slogans and selective reporting. Other cell phones stink because they have crappy service and cause cancer. Cancer! If you can comfortably answer those questions, chances are your source is legit. A bit about Wikipedia. Not to sound too grandma here, but when I was actively researching and then teaching academic research, there was a debate about the legitimacy of students using Wikipedia as a source. From a student's perspective, it's one-stop shopping. Students would ask me frequently if it was okay to use, and my answer was always starting with, yes, but... Its name implies it's similar to an encyclopedia, just online. Yes, but it's also well known wikis are edited by the public. Anyone can get an account and make changes to a wiki. Most times it's for the better, but then there's stuff like this. Yeah. My advice to students is always use Wikipedia as a jumping off point, but not a steady crutch. You're the sleuth here. Fact check it. Go to the bottom of any wiki and there will be sources listed. Check those out. They may lead you to better sources worthy of your time and attention. A bit about social media. The usual suspects include Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Tumblr, and Instagram. It's tempting to rely on these as sources since major news outlets and academic institutions use them to disseminate information. Like most things, there's a catch. All of the info you find on these sites needs to be looked at with great care and within context. Most times, quotes from Facebook or a seemingly relevant tweet are taken out of context and are judged based solely on what's presented. Like looking at the About section on a website, look at who posted the information. A post or tweet by Bill Nye is likely to be more legit in its content than, say, a post from @MissICan'tDrive55. Same goes for YouTube videos. You're watching one right now. Can you be sure what you're hearing is quality content? Okay, so maybe offering myself up as an example is a poor choice. Like print sources, look at the username who published the video. Is it an individual or an organization? Do they cite where they get their info in either the end card or in their description? A bit about podcasts. I'll admit, when I was teaching, podcasting was still relatively new and 0 of my students were clamoring to cite them in their research, so I feel like a fish out of water here. Apply the same techniques for other sources. Who is the presenter? Can you find info in the podcast in other sources? Thanks for sticking with me for this really big video. Next time, I'll be discussing how to integrate your sources into your research essay. Until then, happy researching! Thanks for joining me on this journey in MLA research. If you have any questions, please leave something in the comments, send me an email at englishresearchmla@gmail.com, or send a tweet to @MLA Research Help. Like, retweet, share, and cite your sources.